Hello everyone. Today we'll be looking at CSS, Selectors, Box Model, and Responsive Thinking. What is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. It simply controls how HTML elements look. Let's look at an example. I have a folder here with two CSS. Let me create a file within it and name it index.html. So we're going to have a h1 element here and a paragraph element. So before that let's have a basic HTML5 syntax basic code, and let's call this Cascading Style Sheet, and in the body let's have a main. We have a header, and of course we have a footer. So inside of our main, let's have an h1 element. I'll call this my portfolio, and then let's have a paragraph. Welcome to my website. This is how this looks on our web page. Inside the h1, let's add an attribute called style and call it color blue. And then for the paragraph, let's have a style color gray. So let's go back to our browser, and so we have this. There are three ways to add CSS to your web page. You have the inline CSS method, we have the internal CSS method, and we have the external CSS method. The inline CSS method is when you write CSS directly inside an HTML element like we did earlier for the h1 and the paragraph element, while the internal CSS method, we have to write the CSS inside a style element. And then the external CSS, which is the most common and recommended method of adding CSS to your web page, is you having your CSS in a separate file and linking this file to your HTML page using a link tag. You're going to see all of this in practice. First is the inline CSS, where you have it as an attribute style equal to open quote, and then you put the property and the value for the property. In this case we had blue, and then you have a semicolon after the value. So this is how you put CSS in your HTML page using the inline method. Second method is the internal CSS, where you have it usually in the head element as an element of its own style, and then you put your style rule, your CSS rule, within the style element or within the style tags or between the style opening and closing tags. The syntax for writing the internal CSS is exactly the same as the syntax for writing the external CSS, which is having the name of the element, or let's call this the selector, and the curly bracket opening and closing curly brackets, and then we have the property and the value for it like this. Then for paragraph, we do the same thing. Color gray. Let's remove the inline, and then let's go back to our browser. We have the same output. Should we change this to yellow? This will give us exactly what we have put in the style. But assuming we want to add a different style to all the paragraphs that will be in this page, this is my portfolio website. Now, all these paragraphs, we are having 2 paragraphs now. The both of them, we take the color gray because that's what we've specified in the internal CSS. But should we choose to make one of these different, we can add an inline CSS and say color black. This way, let's see the output. You see the first one is black, and this tells us that the inline CSS has more power than the internal CSS. The inline CSS is often used for quick testing and for small demonstrations, but it is always very difficult to maintain, and assuming we want to have the same style for all our paragraphs, it means we have to start repeating ourselves over and over again. Color gray, and wherever you're having paragraph, you have to continue repeating yourself. Style color gray, and this is where the internal CSS has more advantage than the inline CSS. You don't have to repeat yourself, so this is not scalable, while the internal CSS has better organization than the inline. So, but the disadvantage of the internal CSS is that these styles remain tied only to one page on your website. Assuming we have another page, maybe called about.css, about.html, the styles in index.html, the internal styles here will not be applicable to the styles in about.html. And this is where the external CSS comes in, where you can have a central CSS file that can be used across several or many web pages. So now let's look at how to write an external style. I'll create a file and name it style.css, and then I'll simply copy the content of this element, style element. I've cut it out and paste it in the style.css, and that solves it. Coming here, all I need to do is to remove this, and then you will notice that this is not applied here. The only thing that is applied is the inline CSS I have written here. In order for this to apply, I'll have to link this style, the CSS files, to this index.html. And to do that, I will use the link tag, rel style sheet. This tells you the type of file you're linking, and then the name of the file. in the href attribute, style.css, and this does the magic for us. Let's change this to blue. Okay, that is great. So external CSS like this is much better because each file has a clear responsibility, and then we can use one CSS file to style many pages. It's easier to maintain. When you need to change a color, you edit only one CSS file and you don't have to go through each page to edit the internal style or each element to edit the inline style. It has better performance. CSS selectors. Selectors tell CSS which elements should receive these styles. We have different types of selectors. We have the element selectors, we have the class selector, we have the ID selector, and so many other selectors which you're going to come across as you move on. Now the element selector, this is what we have been using since our class today. The element selector targets all elements of a particular type. In this case, we have H1, that's heading 1, and we have paragraph. These are using their element tag name to target those elements, as we have seen so far. So this tells the browser, select every paragraph and make its text gray, and wherever you come across an H1, a heading 1, make the text blue. It's as simple as that. Now let's look at a class selector. But before doing that, we need to add more HTML code to see the class selector. Let's add a div and give it a class name of card. Now I have one card, right? And I have one div, and I've given it the class name of card. Remember, classes can be shared across elements. So let's have another div with a class name of card again. Then and a third div with the same class name of card. Just like the paragraph being 2 and are able to share one style, elements, we can either target these 3 elements, the 3 card elements, using their element name div or using their class name card. The good thing about using class name is, even if the element that carries this class name is not a div, assuming it's a paragraph, it can still bear the same class name. So that is the good thing about using classes or class names. Now here, let's add some content. Let's say card 1, card 2, and card 3. Now let's go to our styles and give our card a class name, a style of, let's give it a background color. We've used text color. Let's give it a background color of white, and then the card, as I have written it, the browser will see it and want to interpret it as an element name, because there's nothing differentiating this card from the paragraph name we have here and the heading 1 name we have here. In order to tell the browser that this is a class name, you need to add a full stop in front or before the class name. You need to add a full stop before the class name. This way, the browser recognizes that this is a class name. But the background color white I have added here will not actually show here, because by default the web page background color is white. In order for this color to show, we need to give the body element itself a background color. Let's okay, at least blue, it's okay. Then the white background we give to the cards comes out, and we can see clearly that this is white. So all 3 cards receive the style that we have put there. So classes are reusable. This we know from HTML. So one class can style many elements, whether they are div, section, article, paragraph, as long as they share the same class name. And then the next type of selector we shall be looking at is the ID selector. The ID selector, similar to card selector, has something that tells the browser that this is an ID selector, and that is the hash symbol. It tells the browser that this is an ID, but we've not created any element with an ID name of card, so that we should fix. Here, let's have a header, a section. Let's have a section with an ID name of hero. So we've created this. Then in our CSS, let's give the background color of black. So there's no content, hence why we cannot see the color. Sorry. So let's put this now inside the hero section, just for us to be able to see what we are working on. And when we refresh this, we have this. Okay, so now in this case, we can decide to change our color from blue to white to create good contrast, and then we have this. Next, I would like to talk about the use of multiple selectors. Sometimes several elements need the same style. Like I had said, you can either use a class name to target them, but it all depends on how you organize your code, right? So I can decide to say, okay, every text in my hero section should be white. In that case, instead of coming here to write white, I have only one property here, which is color. And for paragraph also, I have only one property, which is color. In this case, I can decide to just use multiple selectors, put a comma after each one, and then paragraph. Then this whole block of code goes, and then I will have all my text as white. This is how you use multiple selectors in CSS. box model. The box model is one of the most important concepts in CSS. Everything on the web page is a box. Every element has these 4 layers: the margin, the border, the padding, and the content of the element itself. The content is the actual text or image that is inside the element, that is between the opening and the closing tags of that element. In this case, my portfolio is the content here. Welcome to my web page, full stop, is the content here. This is my portfolio website, is the content. We have talked about elements and tags in HTML, but for the sake of those who missed those classes or those videos on HTML, that is why I take time to explain some of these again. And padding is the space inside the element that is between the content and the border of the element. The padding pushes content away from the border, and puts an empty space between them, while the border is the visible edge around an element. The margin is space outside the element between the border and other elements. It separates elements from one another. We're going to look at border, margin, and padding one after the other. Border creates a visible outline, okay, while margin pushes other elements away. Let's look at an example. We have a card here. We have with class name card. So, and then we already have a CSS for card with background of white. Let's add some border. The border, and the size of this border will make 1 pixel. We want it to be solid and we want it to be black. And here we've created border for each of our cards. The line that goes between card 1 and card 2 is thicker than the line above card 1, and it is the same as the line between card 2 and card 3, which is also thicker. The reason is because the top border of card 3 and the bottom border of card 2 meet at this point, which makes it look thicker. There's no space between them. They are kissing. And then the border bottom of card 1 and border top of card 2 are also kissing, which make the line there seem thicker. In order to create a space between the cards, we'll add margin. We'll add margin of 20 pixels. Now we see there's space between each of these cards. The 20 pixel margin we have added as a 20 pixel margin top, bottom, left, and right of each card. That is a way you can specify the margin for each. I'll talk about that shortly. Then we have padding. As you can see, there's no space between the left borders and the content, so we want to add some space there. So we add padding of 20 pixels to 20 pixels. So we have this, and our card looks way better. This is actually shorthand way of writing border, margin, and padding. I would like to break this further. For each of these, let me talk about the border first. I have used a shorthand way to write both the border width one pixel, border style solid, border color black. So all three styles or all three properties are what I have written in one property, border. In this property, I've specified the border width, the border style, and the border color, which can be specified separately. So you realize that for border style, you have different values, possible values. You have curve, you have dashed, dotted, double, groove, hidden. Then you can add condition and can make it inherit from the parent element and so on and so forth. And then for the color, we set a color of black. You have this. Even without this, you have this. So it's good you know what we have done. That's why I'm breaking this down. For the margin as well, what we have done this margin top 20 pixel. This is exactly what we have done. Now margin left right first, because this is the order in which they go. Margin bottom, and then margin right. This is what we have done. We have specified all of these. Since they are all the same value, they all have the same value, we did this. Let me comment this out so that we can see that the effect is still the same. Okay, I had margin right again instead of margin left. So the effect is still the same. Now, assuming margin top were 20 pixels, margin bottom 20 pixels, and margin right were 10 pixels. Okay, margin bottom, let's say 5 pixels, then margin right, left, let's say 7 pixels. Just vary the pixels to make sure they're not the same. We'll have this. There is still also a one-line method of writing all of these. Remember I said we had put all of them in one line like this because they had the same value. But in this case, they're not having the same value. So how do we solve this? We write the margin top value first, 20 pixel. Put a space between that and the value for margin right, which is 10 pixels. Then we have margin bottom 10 pixels, and then margin left 7 pixels. And here we go. The same thing applies. Exactly what applies for the margin also applies for the padding. You can do the same thing, exact same thing for the padding. It's the same thing. All you need to do is change this to padding. Or like we had before, you can also have padding top. So you may need to specify one of these properties for either top, bottom, left, or right without specifying value for the others. That way, or in that case, you have to specify it directly, top, and so on. So, assuming margin top and margin bottom have the same value of 20 pixels, and the margin left and margin right, this is margin left now, have the same value of 10 pixels, there is also another shorthand way of writing it. All we do is we say margin top bottom 20 pixels, left right or right left 10 pixels. This is another shorthand way of writing this. The same rule applies for padding. Okay, when I refresh this, I have the same thing. Let's go back a bit. Assuming top and bottom have different values. Let's say 15. Top is 20 pixels, right is 10 pixels, bottom is 15 pixels, and left is 10 pixels. All we need to do is we are specified for top, we specified for top, left, right, and left. So let's write also for bottom, which is 15 pixels. The browser understands that the only side you have not specified value for is the left side. So it applies the value of the right side also to the left side. So that means this value here is for both the right and the left, and not just the right side. So you have this. This is pretty interesting. This same rule applies for padding as well. So let's keep this as it was. Let's leave it as this. I think this is better. So far we've been talking about colors. We talked about text color, we've talked about background color, we've talked about border color. You're going to be coming across colors every now and then. I want to tell you about the different formats colors can take when writing CSS. We have the named colors, which is what we've been using so far. We've used Alice blue, we've used white, we've used black, we've used gray, we've used green, we've used yellow so far. All these are named colors. We have hex color as using hex names, and this is hex name for white, and then for black it's all zeros. The first two zeros are the red component of the color, the second two zeros are the green component, and the last two zeros are the blue component. So should we have full red or full green or full blue? So these are hex names. You can mix them in so many ways. You can decide to have 33333. You can have CC, which kind of sort of gray color. So that is how it goes. And then we have the RGB model. Have RGB for Alice blue. Now we have RGB here. This is RGB value. So you have 240 red, 248 green, and 255 blue. So assuming we have RGB, and then for red we have let's say 51, we have 51, and we have 51, and you have this, so which is close to black. So these are the three main color formats Typography controls how text appears. Good typography dramatically improves readability. Let's say for our paragraph, we have multiple elements here, multiple element selectors. We have given the text value of white, so this is what our H1 and paragraph look like. So we can still specify for paragraph separately, and in this case, let's have the font size, and let's say 16 pixels. By default it's already 16 pixels, so we'll see nothing much. Let's say 24 now, that will see the effect. Okay, this is 24 pixels. 14, let's make it 16, let's leave it at 16. That's the default anyway. So the font size controls the text size, and then the font family controls the typeface. So you have the font families here. You're going to be using Arial sans serif, okay, this is what we are using now. Arial sans serif controls the font face, and then the font weight. This controls the thickness of the font. So usually we have 100 to 900. We have bold, but the common values are usually from 400 to 700. So you can select any one you want. So let's see 900. You see, I just want you to see the effect. That is why I took it to the far extreme. Then you talk about line height. Line height. 1.6 is usually the best value you should use. Line height specifies the spacing between lines in a paragraph. Okay, so let's make this, let's add more text here so we can see the effect of that. So okay, now the line height, let's give it, if you give it a line height of 1, for example, it's very poor, it's very bad. This is what you get. So the best you always have is 1.6. You can have more if you like, but I mean, you know what is good and what isn't. So 1.6 is okay. Then we have letter spacing. This controls the spacing between characters. You can have 1 pixel. Let's have 3 pixels so that you see, creating more space between characters. Measurements are everywhere in CSS, so it's good we know the CSS units that we will be using from time to time. So far we've been talking about pixels. So pixels is an absolute unit. What that means is when a pixel is fixed, for example 1 pixel, 16 pixel, 20 pixels, as we have seen in our margin here, in our padding, once a pixel is fixed, it remains that value. 16 pixels remain 16 pixels. 20 pixels remain 20 pixels, irrespective of the screen, whether it is a mobile phone, whether it is a computer or a television. We are already used to the pixels, which is an absolute unit. Let's look at relative units, those that can be responsive. So the relative units, they adapt to screen sizes. The first one we are going to be looking at is the M, that's the EM unit. This is usually relative to the parent element. Because of that, this is no longer visible. So let's add an inline style here to solve our immediate problem. Let's say color black. Okay, this solves our problem. So every other style that has been added here for HTML, for paragraph, affects this, which is why the paragraph is actually different from every other thing we are seeing here. Should we maybe do this just to make it look different? So you see, it's not so different except for the capitalization of the first two starting letters and the word capitalization. So now to demonstrate the EM unit for card, let's have a font size of 20 pixels. So this is now 20 pixels because it is affected by the card size. But should we choose to add font size for the paragraph itself, we can decide to say we want it to be times 2. 2 EMs means it should be times 2 of the parent, the font size of the parent element. That means to be 2 times. That means to be 2 times the font size of the card element. That is what this means. It will be 2 times the font size of the parent element, which is the card, and card is 20 pixels. So this is what it is. So this is also affecting the paragraphs here. All the paragraphs here are now taking 2 times the font size of the parent element. So that is why this is now 2 times 20, which is now 40 pixels. Should we make this 40 pixels, they will now have 2 times 40, which is 80 pixels. So while others are not affected, this is affected because the parent element font size has changed. So it is not, although they are all paragraphs, the change here is not affecting the other paragraphs here. It's only affecting this particular paragraph because it is the only one that its parent element font value has changed. Okay, so now I keep doing this. This is one relative unit, the EM unit. So it is relative to the parent element. It depends on the size of the parent element. So when I say 2em, it means 2 times the value of the parent element. If I say 1em, it means 1 times the value of the parent element, which will now bring it down to this. If I say 0.5, that means half the size of the parent element. Another relative unit is the REM. The REM is relative to the value of the root element. And what is the root element, or what is the root size? Remember when we were doing the styles for paragraph earlier, we had said the font size was 16 pixels, and that was the default size already. That was the default size already. So this is still 100, but if we change this to the same 2 we had before, because it is now REM and not EM, it no longer takes the value of 100 pixel. So we don't need this anymore. We understand EM now, so we're looking at REM. So it is now times 2 the value of the root element. And looking at our HTML file, the root element there is not the body. It's not the body element. It's actually the HTML element. That is the root element of this HTML page. The HTML element. So, and what is the default value, or what is the value of the HTML element? We have not specified that. If we specify the value here, then we have a value. But if we do not specify a value, like in our case right now, the browser fixes a default value, which is 16 pixels. So now let's specify a value, font size 16 pixels, which is what the browser had set already. So when we say 1 REM now, it's 16 pixels. So when we change this to, let's say, 32, it becomes 32. When we change this to let's say 120 now, it becomes 120. So using REM is usually relative to the font size of the root element. So imagine the browser of a phone having specified the value for the root element. Using this makes it relative. So this is why we call this relative unit, because they are relative depending on their surrounding context. Another relative unit we will be looking at is the percentage. Is a percentage unit. Let's say for the card, let's say the width of the card, we don't want it to take the page, the whole width of the page. Let's say we want it to be 50% of the entire page. So we make it 50%. If we want it to be 25%, we reduce it to 25%. So the percentage also is also a relative unit. Another relative unit is the view width and the view height. The view width and the view height. So this makes use of the view you are seeing, the width and the height of the view visible to you. So let's say we want this view to be 50% of view height, view width. It gives us about the same thing. Or we want it to be 50, before we use 25, 50%, it gives us 50%. We want it to be, let's say the height now, if you want it to be, let's say 100% of view height, it means each card will take 100% of the height of the view itself. So this is what you get. If you want it to be 50% of the view, this is what you get. 50% of the view height. Now from the top to the bottom is 50% of the height of the view we are seeing. So even when the screen size changes, it still applies. You see, the card width is adjusting to the size of the page. As I adjust it, it is expanding. So this is why these are relative unit, the view height and the view width.